Hi everyone, this is Living for the Weeknight, and on today's episode we have Toby, who actually has just started out in architecture recently after quitting his job and is now pursuing Spanish and DJing on the side. I said just quitting his job because right now my mind's gone blank and I forgot what his job used to be, but you'll find out in the podcast. So Toby's actually someone I met on my travels and is now one of my really good friends in London. And in this episode, if you experience any audio issues, I really apologize because as part of the process, I'm still learning about how to clean different types of audio because when you have guests, people record in different ways. So there's always kind of like different things you have to look out for. But it's part of the process, and it's actually quite nice to learn more about how audio works and the different types of settings you can do for cleaning. And also for anyone who wants to, I'd really appreciate if you could give a rating on Spotify and also give it a follow. And if you have any feedback for me, again, I really appreciate it because I don't always realize everything that is kind of wrong that I'm doing with the recording. So if you have feedback, I'll be happy to sort out stuff. And also, if you have feedback over the quality of the content, again, yeah, more than happy to take it on board. So now let's step into this episode. Hey Toby, it's good to have you on finally. It's been a long time coming, and here I am from my hostel recording an episode with you. How have you been, mate?
Of course, you're in a hostel. Where else would you be? No, I'm good. I'm good. Things are good. My end. I'm in London, as you know. Just had a week in Spain. Kind of getting a taste for the backpacker lifestyle for a week again, and realizing how much I've missed it. But yeah, all good. My end.
Yeah, it's a pretty exciting thing. Like, as we both have been. So for the audience, if they do not know, Toby is another one of my friends who I met backpacking. There's a bit of a trend right now of these two episodes, if you can call that a trend. But that feeling of, when we backpack for so long, even just going around in Europe and staying in a hostel for a few days, it kind of brings that nostalgia and nice feeling back of the times in Central and South America.
It's great. It's great. I don't think there's anything that quite compares to the feeling of freedom, the connections that you make with people in such a short space of time. It's so good. It's like a high, isn't it? It's something that I'd love to experience permanently, but obviously you can't. That's not normal life.
Yeah, it is like such a high from it though. Like I feel like when you're meeting like other people traveling and everyone's like chill and like their best kind of self, very happy. It's like you kind of speed run friendships like compared to when you have a full-time job. You're like busy and stressed and just trying to make everything work.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think obviously traveling for me 5 6 months last year was amazing, and I've made really good friendships, including people like yourself. But even there was a night out that I had in Madrid, and I was there on my own for a few days, and yeah, made some really good kind of quick friendships, connections, and then I'll probably never see those people again. But it's the experience that you share with those people during that short time that is just there's nothing that quite compares to that.
Indeed, indeed. And before I start talking about backpacking on this podcast, which is not a backpacking podcast, because this is going to be a repetitive theme that the audience will get used to hearing, but maybe it will promote them to backpack as well.
Yeah,
Who knows?
yeah.
Who knows? But let's step into it then. So tell me, Toby, who are you? What do you do for work?
So who am I? That's a good question. I feel like my identity seems to change every few years at the minute. So I'm 27 years old now. I'm from the northwest of England, from Preston. I'm living in London. I've been here for the last 9 months or so. And I don't think I can say I'm an architect just yet, but I've began my path, my journey to becoming a licensed architect a little bit later on in life than most people decide to do that. But yeah, I've got kind of a bit of experience in a few different fields, and I decided last year or the year before that I wanted to make the change, and I'm right at the start of that journey. So still full of excitement and of the opportunity that awaits, I suppose.
Exciting times, a new page in your life, like especially being in a new city, changing your location, changing your career completely. So that clearly is a lot of change. And like, how have you been finding that? Like, was it quite difficult at the start? Did you find it exciting or ups and downs? Tell me about it.
I think I've kind of got used to change. I most of my life up until the age of 22 was fairly straightforward. I kind of grew up in grew up in the same town, really good group of friends around me, amazing family around me, and I got to the point where an opportunity came up to move to the Middle East, move to Qatar for working over there for a company that I was working for in the UK, which I went for. So I went over there for 3 years, which was a huge change at that age, at 22 years old, and being dropped into the Middle East. But an amazing experience. And then I went travelling for 5 to 6 months after being out there for 3 years. So yeah, moving to London and moving into this next chapter of my life, it wasn't quite as difficult as I thought it'd be. I mean, the process of leaving my old life, I suppose, at times it's been challenging, but yeah, I think stepping into this chapter, I was super excited from day one, and I'm still excited now. Yeah, it's good. I'm enjoying it.
Would you say that your time, taking that time out to go backpack and just get completely away from work after, like, helped you with that transition of moving to London?
Massively. I think, understandably, most people, when they start a new job or they move to a new city on their own, it can be quite a daunting thing. But I think for me, because I'd spent 6 months of my life traveling and meeting new people every single day, you know what it's like. You meet 30 people a day at times when you're traveling. You're getting used to kind of clicking with people straight away, trying to remember all these names. But that kind of became the norm. So for me, moving to London and starting in my new job, I remember having no kind of feelings of nervousness or anything. No, there was no fear. It was another day in the life. I was going into a new location, meeting new people. I suppose the only difference is I've actually had the chance to build more kind of longer relationships and friendships with these people, because I'm with them every day. So yeah, different to traveling, obviously, but yeah, I felt like I kind of got into it quite quickly, which was nice.
Absolutely, and I kind of agree with you there. You know, like I found personally, I actually had something maybe not super similar to you because I wasn't working in a completely different country before that, but post university, I went from London, then backpacked, and then moved to Bristol, and I had the same thing. And I thought being away, having that space and time, and even, you know what, just like I made a friend who she was from Bristol and then was moving to Bristol eventually, and kind of having someone that was already like living in the place, it actually helped my transition so much.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing for me being in London. Moving here wasn't really a big. It didn't feel like a big decision, I think, because I was away and I knew I wanted to come back to Europe. I wasn't too excited about going back to Preston. I mean, I love going home, I love my family, I love my friends, but I think at this stage of my life I was kind of ready to go to a big European city, and I was kind of thinking, if I come back to the UK, London is the place that I want to be. I had Barcelona in mind, Amsterdam, Rotterdam for architecture is amazing. So I kind of had these places that I knew that I wanted to go to one of these big cities. And finding work in architecture is so difficult, especially when you don't go through the traditional kind of education process. And the only job that I managed to find was in slap bang in the middle of London in Piccadilly Circus. So yeah, things kind of fell quite nicely. Things fell into place quite quickly.
Piccadilly Circus, would you call that an architect's dream as a place in terms of how it looks?
It's an interesting place. It's quite a historic, significant place in terms of central London and the kind of meaning that it has to so many international visitors. I mean, every single day I walk past Piccadilly Circus, kind of forwards and backwards, and you see people coming out of the underground station, looking up at the screens, taking photos. And I always compare it to when I was in New York at the beginning of my trip last year, and the first time I saw Times Square, the kind of reaction I had, because it's this super famous landmark area that everybody knows about. I see it every day, so it doesn't really excite me too much anymore. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I will keep my opinions of that area to a limit. I think it's an interesting area, but I think when you live in London, it's somewhere you don't really want to go.
Of course, it's not a place that I spend my weekends really.
Yeah, but so that, like, I was going to ask you why London out of all the places, but you've basically answered that, which is good. But why the move to architecture? What was it you kind of wanted from that?
It's interesting. For a long time, probably since I was at school, so over 10 years ago, which is frightening to say, I've always had an interest in architecture. I've always had an interest in design and the way that buildings are kind of formed. Because you think about what architecture means and how it affects people across the globe. Every single person is impacted by architecture in some form or another. You take shelter, you live in a home, you go to an office to work, you go to a factory to work, whatever you may do in your life, everything in architecture is surrounded by everybody. I think at the age of 16, when I was leaving school, the idea of going through another 8 years of studying to become an architect, I had no interest in doing that. finishing school for me was an opportunity to go and get out in the kind of working world. I ended up doing an aerospace engineering apprenticeship. I've always been interested in how things work. Kind of went through this apprenticeship scheme, ended up working in construction management. So even though it wasn't architecture, it was kind of as close as I could get to design and architecture in that role in that company. And it's something that I've always been passionate about, and for a long time I've kind of considered making the change. And then I found out the last couple of years ago that the Royal Institute of British Architects have opened up a slightly different route to qualification, which means that people with experience and are working within a practice can qualify in a different way, which means I didn't have to go back to university and go through the student life. So yeah, I've always had an interest, and I've always found myself, I mean, friends and family probably laugh about this, but I'd sit on YouTube for hours sitting and watching architecture or architects talking about kind of even small projects, the way that somebody will turn an ex-council flat in the centre of London into an amazing kind of small place that people live within. It's something I've always been passionate about. So I just thought, I'm at a stage now where I was leaving the Middle East, I was kind of closing one door, and the next door that I wanted to open was the architecture door. So yeah.
I like that, to be honest, and it's because you would say like your life was pretty secure and you're doing well in Qatar, so it is a big move to do something you've done. Like, you have gone from the position of where you're very financially secure, you're doing good, you had that kind of stability. But does it feel like, how does that excitement feel of, you've done something very big, but how's that been feeling? Like, you must have been a little bit nervous before, because change is exciting, can be a little bit scary. We all deal with it in different ways. I don't know, you might have been like super excited and not scared at all, but how did you find that kind of feeling before you started, and how has it been since?
I think the idea of transitioning into architecture, that's never really frightened me. I think the biggest thing that I found, the thing that kind of the most difficult thing of the process, or the most difficult part of the process, was leaving my old job. I was at that company for 10 years, and like you said, quite secure. I had good opportunities to carry on working there in the Middle East. I had opportunities to come back to the UK in the Northwest and continue working there, but I wasn't excited about it. And yeah, I suppose I kind of had an opportunity in my life where it felt like the right time to do something else. I think leaving the old chapter was the hardest decision. As soon as I handed my notice in, and the wheels kind of started in motion in terms of kind of ending my lease in Qatar, booking my flights home, and everything else, I was kind of excited for the next chapter. And obviously, I wasn't going straight from one job into another. I knew that I had this 6 months of travel ahead of me that I was excited for. But it's funny to think back to, because I remember the main reason that I decided to hand my notice in before I went travelling, and why I decided to take time out, was because I did a 9-month kind of foundation course in architecture, and I'd submitted my application for the course, and I hadn't actually heard back by the time I'd handed my notice in. And I remember when I handed my notice in, I was a little bit apprehensive. I was worried that if I didn't get on this course, I might not have ended up being able to start this kind of process, this journey into architecture. And that was the thing that I was most worried about. And I remember FaceTiming my dad one evening, just to kind of get his support, I suppose. I was like, Dad, I've got my notice ready. It's signed. I kind of want to do this, but I'm a little bit nervous. I don't know what's next. And I remember his words so well. He said to me, Toby, I was your age, or a little bit older. He was like, I was late 20s, early 30s. I was working at the bank. I had a stable job. I had a family, 3 children, a wife, food to put on the table. And I remember the moment that he did this, but he was telling me when he handed his notice in at the bank, he decided he wanted to go and do his own thing. And he was petrified at the time. And I remember him telling me that, and I felt so inspired and so motivated. I was like, right, that's it. I can do this. I don't have a family. I don't have any financial ties. I'm kind of on my own. I can do this now. And I remember having the conversation. And then my mum came into the room, and she was kind of like, "Go on, Toby, do this. It's now or never kind of thing." And then my brother and sister are both away; they're both in Australia at the minute, and it's rare that all my family are together. But my brother was at home, and my sister was back from Australia, and they were all in the room at the same time, kind of giving me that final push. And I was just like, you know what, this is it. This is the moment. And yeah, I'll always remember that, because that felt like a really significant part of the process. I'm really lucky to have such a supportive and amazing family. But yeah, to have them all in the room, and even our pet dog Ralph there as well. It was what I needed.
Was Ralph barking you on there in the
he was
background?
he was probably trying to eat some socks, just looking as confused as he always does.
He's like, why is Toby on a
Yeah,
screen and where are my
who is
socks?
who is this man, this foreign looking man?
uh, but no, that like it's sometimes you get that feeling of if not now, then when, and it's something I've had. Like I've done very different things to you, but just that feeling of when I qualified as an actuary, like if I don't quit now and backpack, when am I going to do it? Like and I think it's a thing that's a bit scary to take the plunge because you can always think about how the future is going to go, but sometimes you've got to just like stop thinking about the future just a little bit and just do it.
Yeah, and I think that's when the best things in life happen. Going into the unknown for me is something that I've always thrived within. Making a decision and not fully knowing how things are going to pan out. There's always a bit of excitement in that, and I think I can. My issue is that when life feels mundane, I can get a little bit bored, and then I start to think, oh, what if this, what if that? And I think when I was in Qatar, I was doing a degree in construction management, and I always had that as like a not an end goal, but that was what I was kind of working towards. And I was fortunate enough because the company I was working for had paid for that, so it was something I was kind of tied into. And I remember finishing my degree, and I had this strange feeling where that should be something that people are super proud and super passionate about. Like it's a huge life achievement getting a bachelor's degree, and I just had no emotion. I remember speaking to my parents. I got the certificate through. There was talk about flying to the UK to do my graduation. I just had no interest in it. No interest in kind of celebrating the completion of my degree. So yeah, I think throughout the process there's been a number of things that have kind of helped me realise that maybe this isn't quite the right path. There's something that I want to go and follow.
For sure, and it's like it's hard in life to do everything perfectly of how you want to do it as you're growing because you're always changing as a person anyway, and it's hard, and you're discovering like things can end up different. You can think, oh, this is my dream, I want to do it, I'm going to do it from age 18, do it, and then it's not for you. But equally, you can do and then that can lead you to kind of discovering what it is you want to do, and so like a big reason that I wanted you on the podcast is because you are actually a serial doer. You do so much you do, like, and I know for a fact like your passion for architecture is very real. Like as you talk about, you mentioned that you've always been watching a lot of YouTube videos about it. You're always reading up, and then like I've seen you doing things which are really trying to aid your progress in the field. Like for example, seeing you like actually learning to sketch from square one, just because you want that to aid like your dreams here of becoming an architect.
It's funny. I think it's only when I speak to other people about the things that I do in my life that I kind of realise. As a kid, when I was 16 years old, I was a very different person to the person I am today. I think I've got so much drive and energy to kind of push myself in all sorts of different directions, pushing myself out of my comfort zone, traveling solo for 6 months, following this architecture dream, this architecture passion. Like you said, going and meeting my tutor that I've got on my course, sitting in the British Library and sketching. I felt like some kind of cultured, I don't know, some kind of cultured artist. I'm Toby. That's not really the person that I would say that I am. But these are the things that I'm kind of pushing myself into. And even Spanish, learning Spanish is something that's a journey that you're going on as well, and something that I'm continuing to do. I've got some kind of DJ decks recently, and I'm teaching myself how to mix music. There's so much that I'm doing, and I suppose it comes back to probably the theme of this podcast. These are all things that are. It's kind of testing my own creativity, I suppose. I've never really considered myself to be a super creative person, but I think the more that I explore these creative avenues, the more that I'm realizing there's so much creativity within me that's been locked away for so many years.
Yeah, and I can agree with you more there. Like as you know, I'm like pursuing a lot of new creative passions as well, and it's stuff that I have never done before. Like my life for a very long time was basically working while studying, no time for this and that. And the minute I told myself that I was going to get some time, I thought, fuck it, I'm going to commit to it and like try and pursue all of these passions. And it is like I when you talked about there that you never considered yourself like a creative person, and you realize like you do have this creativity there, like this creativity that's like ready to like burst. I'm exactly the same. I never considered it myself, and I truly believe that everyone does have creativity in them. It's just what could dictate whether you can discover it is if you have a passion for wanting to do something, and also like if you can get yourself to start doing something, because that's the most difficult thing. Sometimes we might even have a passion for something, but we just tell ourselves from the start, no, I'm not creative, I can't do it. But you never know unless you try.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think that's the thing for me. I when I did the course last year, so I'm currently studying what is traditionally the kind of part one, so kind of bachelor's degree equivalent in architecture. But last year, to progress onto this stage, I had to do what was called a foundation in architecture, and I think that was a real kind of wake up call for me, because it was focused not towards learning about architectural history, architectural theory, learning about the design process. It was purely kind of stripping architecture back to its purest form, and teaching the students, including myself, about creativity. And maybe that's part of the reason as to why I'm in this headspace now. But it was as simple as seeing and appreciating the creative process in absolutely everything that's around you. You think about your every single day of your life. Even going on Netflix and binge watching 6 episodes of Black Mirror like I did last weekend. It's there's a creative process behind people creating these documentaries, these stories, these TV programs. Every single book that you pick up and read, there's a creative process that somebody's gone through to create that story that you read, and that goes all the way through to waking up in the morning, cleaning your teeth, and picking up a toothbrush. Somebody's gone through a process of designing that, thinking about the ergonomics, thinking about how you hold that, thinking about what it actually means to clean your teeth. It sounds a little bit ridiculous, but everything that's around you, whether it's man-made, I suppose mainly man-made, but even natural things, you can certainly take inspiration and appreciate the beauty of nature around us. So yeah, that was a really big kind of eye-opener for me, and something that I think is quite an important thing for most people to think about in terms of creativity.
It is, and it's like I really resound you on that point that there's a creative process for everything. Because like I think when I started realizing like how deeply I was thinking about the creative process was when I was going to certain. I never used to be someone who was that into museums or art exhibitions, and one thing that actually struck me was when I was traveling and going to different exhibitions, I wasn't always thinking about the actual piece of art and what it looked like. I kept thinking about what was going through the thought process of the person when they were making this. How did they get started? How did they did they have a plan? Were they doing it free flow? And just even like the little minute details of like what was the creative process behind the frame they chose, and like how that matches their piece of art. Like that's kind of what was going through my head rather than the actual art, just kind of more how it was made.
That's the thing, isn't it? It's easy to walk through a museum and I mean, I'm guilty of doing this. You walk through the Tate Modern and you might see certain things that you appreciate, but there's so much in places like that it can be so overwhelming. But you just think every single little thing that's in there, even if you look at it and it doesn't really mean too much to you, even if you don't fully understand what it means and what the person that created it was trying to portray, there's so much that's gone into that. There's so many decisions that have been made. It might be weeks, months, years of work to get to that point, so that this person can portray something in the way that they want to portray it. When you think about things in that way and you see things from a slightly different light, everything. You can find beauty in everything. You can really appreciate everything that's around you.
Oh, 100%, and I couldn't agree with that more. And so before you also talked about how you're learning Spanish, you're learning to DJ, you're sketching. So would you say they're the main things you do outside of work, or is there anything else?
What else? It tends to change. I think if you asked me that question 3 or 4 months ago, I decided to sign up to a half marathon, so I was doing quite a lot of running. Quite a lot of training in the gym. I'm guilty of. I've not really been into the gym too much recently. I need to get back into that. But yeah, I think my studies as well. So sketching and I think one of the best things about the course that I'm doing is obviously there's the architectural theory side, which is for me really really interesting and something I want to learn a lot more about. But there's also the design project, which when you're doing a design project, there's so many creative avenues that you can go down with that. So yeah, I think. Every week in my life seems to be different. I'm not on the decks every weekend. I suppose I learn Spanish every weekend, but yeah, learning Spanish is definitely one of the main things that I'm doing at the minute. And I think trying to prioritize a social life in London is something that I've really pushed. I think there were times living in the Middle East, certainly when I first moved over there and having COVID or living through COVID over there, that was quite a tough time at times where I felt quite alone, as most people did in the world. So I think being in London now, being fortunate to have a really good kind of social life here and some really good friends that I've made here, it's actually again appreciating going out, having a beer, sitting down with people, having conversations, and appreciating that a lot more now, given certain times of my life that weren't quite as social.
Definitely, and I can agree with you more there. Like it kind of like as a lot of people had a very bad time in the pandemic, myself included, but I think the good thing that came out of it was it really started like after what felt like some years lost in my life, it really pushed me to just be like, preach, just go and do what you want to do. Like, fuck it, go do it. And I think that is quite a nice thing that has come out of it. I actually wanted to also like touch on a bit more about I'm going to touch on about the Spanish and the DJing like separately. But so you're learning Spanish weekly. I remember because you did Spanish school a bit before me in our travels when you did it in Guatemala, and then you were going to go do it in Colombia, which actually inspired me to trial it out as well. As much as I didn't like that Spanish school, which I blame for certain people getting me gastroenteritis. Not going to name names, but they know who they are. But yeah, like with Spanish, how has it felt like from starting out where you didn't know a word of Spanish to the first thing I want to ask is like, where did that passion to want to learn come from?
Do you know what? I kind of talk about this quite a lot. I've got one of my best friends at home. He lived in Spain for I don't know 4 or 5 years when he was younger. And I met him at high school. He came to our high school in the last year or the year before the last year. And we knew that he lived in Spain, and everyone assumed that because he lived in Spain he was Spanish, so he became known as Spanish Dan, and he had a blue fringe for a few months. So yeah, anyway, he was this exotic guy that had joined our school. And the summer after I met him, I went to Spain with another one of my friends, and Dan's place in Spain was super close to where I was staying with my other friend. So we went to see him and we spent a few days with him. And I remember being in a restaurant and ordering some food. And I'd never really experienced this before. I think with the UK, most people speak English. Obviously in London, Manchester, these big international cities, it's a little bit different. But certainly Preston in the northwest, you don't really get people learning languages. It's not really something people do because you don't need it when you travel. And I remember this is the first experience in my life where somebody that I was really good friends with spoke another language fluently. And I remember sitting at the table, figuring out what I wanted to eat, and the waiter coming over and speaking in Spanish. And the waiter just made noise to me that made no sense. And then my friend Dan understood the noise that he'd made, and then he replied with a similar set of noises that kind of sounded similar, but obviously were different. And then these two were communicating in a language to me that was completely foreign. I didn't understand a word they were saying. I was so blown away by that. So blown away that my friend, he spoke English natively because he's English and he obviously lived here when he was younger. And then he went over to Spain and then he spoke Spanish. He tells me he speaks Spanish like a 13-year-old, but for me it sounded like the best Spanish I'd ever heard. And I don't know, I think normally when you hear languages, it's people, certainly when I was growing up, it was you're on holiday, you're in a taxi, and it's people that you don't know too well. But to observe my friend speaking these two languages so well, I was blown away by it. I don't know whether it was that from that point, but I've always said I wanted to learn a language, and I remember going through periods where I tried to learn Spanish here and there, but it's one of those things that you really have to commit to get anywhere with. It's probably one of the most tedious and painful process, yet most rewarding processes that I've been through, and I'm certainly nowhere near fluent. I've got a lot more to learn. But yeah, and so I think that was it. And then going traveling, knowing that I was going to be in Central and South America for 6 months, I was like, right, if there's any time that you're going to learn the language, now is the time. You're going to be in these places where people don't speak English. And I was at home for 2 months before I went off traveling. And I was sat on Duolingo every day, literally every day for like 2 months. I had 2 or 3 hours of Spanish, where I had a tutor, a guy in Barcelona that I was having lessons with 2 or 3 times a week, and it was a really, really intense, immersive experience. But I still felt like I knew nothing. I knew the basics, and then I remember getting to Mexico City. That was my first stop on my trip, or in Latin America anyway. And I remember getting to the airport and trying to arrange a fee with a taxi, trying to agree a price with the taxi driver. And I was full of confidence. I was like, I know Spanish, I've been learning for 2 months. And that was when it really hit me. I was like, fuck, you know absolutely nothing. But yeah, it's been a beautiful process. It's
And I
amazing.
kind of want to like touch on that point because I've been learning Spanish as well, and I know that feeling because when you start, it can be a very humbling experience of how little you know, and it's
Yeah.
actually something where I think it's your first kind of few portions of learning the language is when it's the hardest. I think that's when most people give up because you start off and you're like I'm getting better, and then you have and then it just takes one conversation where it can really hit you quite hard that you feel like I'm not learning anything, I don't know anything, but you have to overcome that. And how have you found like when you reach those stumbling blocks, like what's it look like? Have you ever felt like you wanted to give up, or and how do you kind of like push through onto that next level?
I think there's so many times. I don't think I've ever felt like I want to give up with it. I think there's times where I've just been the thing with learning a language. I'm 27 years old now. I feel like I'm at the stage of my life where I'm quite confident in myself. I know who I am. But learning a language now reminds me of 14, 13-year-old Toby when you kind of you're a teenager, you're trying to figure yourself out, you're turning up to I don't know, certain like family, not family occasions, but you might feel a little bit awkward talking to adults. I kind of feel like that again now. So last week I was in Spain because I went to visit a really good friend that I met in Qatar. He's Spanish. He lives in the US now, and him and his wife were home to celebrate their first child's first birthday. And I stayed with them for 3 or 4 days in this remote village town, not too far from Valencia. And I know Spanish enough to get by, but I was dropped into this kind of family, this house. It was kind of like a language exchange, and I realised at that point how little I actually knew. But I also kind of realised how rewarding the process is of people knowing that you're English and just assuming, he doesn't speak any Spanish, but then going through the process of actually communicating with these people, and it's broken Spanish. But I was speaking with my friend's dad for about an hour one night, and I remember we spoke about quite a lot Spanish culture, his views on like bullfighting and bull running and all these like controversial topics, and then we veered onto Brexit and Spanish politics, and I was kind of at my limit then. I was like, wow, I could have had to say to him, this is a little bit too far for me. But I think at times like that, I can get a little bit frustrated because I'm like, why can't I speak? Why can't I speak about this? Why don't I have this vocabulary to be able to explain this? But then when I think about where I was 2 years ago, I couldn't even say my age properly. So when I think about that transition period I've been on, even though there's times where you feel stupid, you feel awkward, you feel like a teenager again because you're in this new environment trying to communicate in a different way. When I think back to where I was 2 years ago when I knew absolutely no Spanish to where I am now, I'm like, fuck, you have come so far with this. And I think the other thing with Spanish or language learning in general, there's no linear process. As you've probably figured this out I'm quite structured in the way that I like to have a plan, step one, step two, step three, and kind of go through a process to get to the end point. Probably my engineering background and the way that my brain works. Language learning doesn't work like that because you can try that, but then you forget half the things that you learn in step one, and then you need them to have a conversation in step 15. It's kind of all over the place, which has kind of got its own beauty within the process. It's amazing.
It is. It's and like there is so much beauty in that process because it's something that's so different for everyone in terms of how you learn and stuff. And I actually do find, like as you said, you were in Valencia and you were talking to your friend's dad. Sometimes when you put yourself in those opportunities where you really like you start learning the language in a bit of a different way, but like it's because we've all had it. When you're traveling and when you're just having these short conversations with people you're just meeting in Spanish, you're kind of really practicing that same Spanish over and over again. So you're getting good at that. And then all of a sudden they ask you a question and there's two of the words you don't know. And then you're
Yeah.
like,
It's like I always think it's like English though, and I remember when I first moved to the Middle East, I was all of a sudden I'd gone from being in the northwest of England all my life until the age of 22, and speaking with most people that you interact with in Preston are native English speakers, so you get used to just speaking in that way, and everybody understands you. I remember when I first went to the Middle East, and I was sat in a meeting room with all sorts of people my Spanish friend was in there, Filipino guys, Indians, a Scottish guy, Lebanese, a real international uh, group of people. And I remember speaking in the way that I would have spoke at home, and trying to explain some requirements for 2 minutes in a meeting, and then just looking at the sea of faces, looking at me with complete confusion. And that was like the first realization for me. I'm like, right, okay, if I want to communicate with these guys, not you don't need to dumb your English down, but you need to use words that are understood by the international non-native English speaker. And I kind of feel like that with Spanish. I feel like when you speak to somebody in Spanish that knows that you're learning, they will use language and terminology that you understand. Being dropped in the middle of Valencia in this family environment, it was wild, because that is language, I suppose. If we spoke as robotic between ourselves as you would with somebody that's non-native in English, it's a little bit boring, isn't it? But yeah.
So you were mentioning that feeling of, when you're presenting in a board meeting in Qatar, and I think what it is that for us English people, it's not always it is using more simplified English in terms of language the international audience can understand, but also we have a habit of not speaking the English language properly, and speaking a lot of slang, and I think it's actually a really good skill, like something backpacking gives you as well, to actually have to change the way you communicate. And I think, as you said, that actually links into like teaching you how to learn Spanish in a bit more of an effective way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think the language learning process for me has done two things. I think it's really helped me appreciate. There's so many people, especially in the job that I'm in now. There's or being in London. There's so many people that work and live in a foreign language, and for me, learning Spanish now, I appreciate that so much. I think when I was younger and I'd go away and people don't speak English, I wouldn't turn my nose up, but I'd kind of question why that is. Like, oh, come on, you want to learn English to a point where you can communicate with people. I've spent 2 years now learning Spanish at quite a rate, having lessons most weeks and trying to absorb as much as I can. And I feel like I am nowhere near the point that I feel like I probably would. The place that I thought I would have been at 2 years ago now, if that makes sense. So I've got so much respect for the people that live their lives in a foreign language, and I've also really appreciated. Oh, I now really appreciate how communicating for me to communicate with somebody that isn't a native English speaker, or not even just that, somebody that isn't British. You speak to some Americans in a certain way. I remember this on my trip, and they won't necessarily understand the certain things that you're trying to say, or you'll say a word that to them means something completely different. So it's getting used to communicating in a way where everybody understands.
And it's so true. Like in this hostel I'm staying at now, I remember a few weeks ago there was an American talking to someone from Sunderland, and it was almost like they were speaking two different languages because the American people could not understand them for the life of them, and it was just quite.
It's so
It
funny.
it is, and but it's given me as well like an appreciation for people who do live their life in a foreign language, because in the process of learning a language, it's not straight away that all your thoughts are in that second language. But as like, do you do the same where sometimes I have to, if I want to say something, I have to think about it in English sometimes if I'm really trying to struggle to think of the words?
Yeah, I think the only time when I don't do that is when I'm saying the most basic things. When I'm saying things that I've said so many times, like it's okay in Spanish, está bien, está bien. Like I don't even think about that; it just comes out my mouth. As soon as I'm trying to construct a bit more of a complex sentence, that's where I do kind of fall into thinking about it in English, and then quickly trying to think about, okay, English, how does that adapt to Spanish, and then trying to kind of build your sentence that way. And I think that's also made me realize now, when you speak to certain people, you speak to somebody whose native language is Spanish, for example, they will usually make the same mistakes, and you kind of get used to those mistakes being made. Like Spanish people will say no at the end of most things that they say. And I've always thought, why is that? Why are you saying no to confirm? But then you realize when you start to learn Spanish, that is a very common thing in their language, and that's something that I've started doing now when I speak Spanish.
Yeah, because it's that
Um,
thing. It's they're not saying no as in no. It's like, am I right or am I wrong?
yeah, exactly,
And
exactly.
like so now like I wanted to like actually talk a bit more about your about DJing, because with Spanish you're doing weekly lessons, very committed to it, to making it work, and I've seen how hard you work with that in terms of the outside stuff you do too. But DJing, it's like because as you know, me too, I'm trying to learn to DJ, so there's a theme here. But how like tell me like how did you get started into that, and what has the process been like so far?
I think it's something I've always wanted to try. I think I've always loved electronic music, and I've always kind of been to different events where I've thought, this is the idea of mixing music and creating these sounds in different ways. I've always thought to be quite a cool thing. I think the idea of actually buying some decks and giving it a go, I've always just put off. I remember I had this this period. I got back from travelling. I remember speaking to Will about this quite a lot because Will's really into his DJing and Paul as well, having conversations with Paul. And I remember getting, and yourself actually, I know that you were keen to learn. I remember getting back from my trip and I had like 6 months between my foundation course finishing for my architecture and then the next stage starting in the March. I was like, you've got 6 months without any studying. What the hell are you going to do with yourself? So I was like, right, I'll just buy some decks. And when I first got them, I was using them a lot and kind of stumbling my way through them. Had a few different sessions with different people where people were teaching me the ropes. And I'm still not great now. I still don't know that much, but it's more the process of just getting them out, mixing a bit of music, having I don't know, having a bit of fun on them, and especially when you're with somebody else. I think when I'm on my own, I don't really use them. But I had a friend of mine that came down to stay with me a few weeks ago, and we got them out and we were kind of playing them together, and I was kind of teaching him how to use them, and I really enjoyed that. We were on them for probably 4 hours just mixing music, and like we were so excited. So yeah, it's something. It's not something that I think with Spanish I'm really putting the time in. I think with DJing, it's not something that I ever will. I don't want to play for people. I think it's just for my own enjoyment and being with friends, mixing music. It's a good laugh. It's enjoyable.
And that's the thing, it's like a passion for yourself. It doesn't necessarily have to be something you're gonna do as your professional job or monetize or make money from. It can be purely for yourself. And I really do respect that, because I think sometimes people can get a bit too sucked into thinking, if I'm gonna learn to DJ and then how am I going to get to the stage of DJing in a club? And it's like you don't exactly need to be honest. It's whatever you want from it is kind of like how you're satisfied with your passion.
Exactly, and I think I do so many things. I think if I push myself to the limits on every single thing that I do, I think I don't know what would happen. My heart would probably blow up or something. That's because there's so many different things I'm trying to put my energy towards, and I might not use them for, I don't know, 2 months, and then I get them out and I have a bit of fun, and then I might not use them for a month. So it's not something that I'm really consistent with. But I also think you can't be consistent with everything. You're studying, you're learning Spanish, trying to keep fit, trying to get out running, you're trying to socialise, you're trying to carry or maintain a full-time job, quite a stressful job. It's like there's only so many hours in the day. So yeah, I think it's more a thing that I think when you're back in London, we'll have to have a little session, see what we can do.
Definitely, and that would be such good fun. And like I think with it, it's like I was going to ask you like what do you think like progress looks like with it, because I'm kind of the mind like it's taken me a very long time to kind of get here with that respect, where it doesn't have to be like such big steps or on a timeline. I think just little by little, if you're getting better, no matter how small that step is, like just getting a transition right. I think that's kind of what it's about. Like, what do you think with respect to that matter?
I think that's like anything in life, isn't it? I think there's certain things that everyone would love to be amazing at what they want to do straight away. And I think I was like that with Spanish. When I first started learning Spanish, I was like, right, 6 months fluent. That's it. That's my plan. And then you kind of get to the 6 month point, and you're like, right, okay, I can say my name. I can ask how somebody is. I can talk about my family. What's the next stage? And I think I've realised now, I'm 2 years in, I've still got so much to learn, but I've kind of realised that even if I improve my language, like, I don't know, 1% every single week, that still accumulates over a longer period to a lot of improvement. And I think it's like that with anything in life. I've decided to kind of move into architecture recently, and it's something that I've got a lot of experience in construction and design management, and I know a lot more than the average person that comes out of university in terms of practical understanding and practical knowledge of the profession. But when I pick up a pen and I try and draw, that's something that I'm learning. And yeah, of course, I'd love to be an amazing sketcher, someone that can just pick things up and portray their ideas in a certain way. But it's something that's a weakness of mine and something that I'm actively trying to improve. And even going to going to the British Library with my tutor and just sitting, and it was as simple as just watching my tutor draw and draw in perspective, and just her just kind of explaining the process she was going through. And it was interesting because even though usually when you see somebody's drawings or somebody sketching, it's on Instagram, or you'll see the end result and you're like, wow, that's amazing, I could never ever do something like that. Watching my tutor build up this sketch on a page, it didn't look amazing. She won't mind me saying this, but it didn't look amazing as she was going through the process of building up the kind of the drawing, the base of the drawing. And then when she starts to add detail and she starts to shade in a certain way and add depth to the drawing, I'm like, wow, that's when the drawing starts to pop. And when you sit there and watch somebody do something in that seems impossible, and you kind of see the process that they go through, you realise actually it's not that difficult. I can't draw anywhere near as good as my tutor can, but if I gave this the time and the attention for the next 5 years that I probably need to, then there's no reason why I can't be at that point at that time.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, I think like that's such a good point there, where I think especially because we're given a similar age, I don't know how it is now. When you go to school, like, especially like the way you're taught art, it's quite often you think, oh, you got to be gifted at it, or you're just not cut out for it. But it is, a lot of these things are learned skills, and like little by little you can progress if you put time into it. But I think there's been a big misconception that in the artistic world you're either born with it or you're not, which I don't think is true.
Yeah, I think that's something I've really learned recently, and I keep coming back to it. But learning a language for me, I learned Spanish at school for a year or 2 years. Didn't remember a thing, other than the basics. But going from speaking absolutely no Spanish to being able to communicate in a language that used to be completely foreign to me now, I'm like, actually, you have gone from a complete beginner in this skill set to where you are today. There's no reason why you can't do that in anything else in life. Like you said, when I was at school, I wasn't really artistic, I wasn't really creative, used to hate music, used to hate drama, didn't hate art, but I didn't love it. I wasn't really one of those children that would sit down and sketch and draw like other people that go into architecture maybe. But where I am now, realising that that's quite an important skill set for an architect to have, I realise now that it's just a process like anything else in life. Riding a bike, learning how to ride a bike, learning how to speak, learning how to walk, run, swim, whatever it may be. It's just something that you can learn.
I like that, learning how to walk, run, or swim. That is such a good point. And another thing I kind of wanted to touch on then was, before we mentioned like it's little by little and it can take time, but you know, if we were all able to just to look at something, pick it up and be perfect at it straight away, I think it would be a bit boring, wouldn't it? I think there's excitement with, although you know you hit the times where you can lose a bit of encouragement, but kind of getting past that and seeing yourself develop is, for me, that can actually be more exciting than the end result sometimes.
Absolutely, it would be such a boring life if everyone did the same thing. And I think there are so many things out there that people can put their time and kind of attention towards, and you can excel. I'm a strong believer you can excel in anything in life. I think it's just picking the things that you want to excel within, and this is probably where I'm quite spontaneous in the fact that I will become addicted with things. I remember when I was kind of late teenage or early 20s, I was really into mountain biking. Me and a few mates. Just love the adrenaline of going into the mountains, and especially being from the northwest of England, you're spoilt by the places around there that you can take a mountain bike into. And I became obsessed with it. I'd be cleaning it every night. I'd be putting new parts on it, sending photos to my mates. A little bit sad, really. So yeah, I got super addicted to that. Kind of got into rock climbing, bouldering. I was going and doing that 3 times a week. Not that I ever wanted to compete or anything, but became kind of really, really focused and fixated on that thing, and then kind of got bored of it. In fact, no, that's when I moved to the Middle East, and then even now being back in the UK, I've got these other things that I'm doing: learning Spanish, studying, learning how to draw, the kind of social side of being in London. And I do wonder whether I will always be like that, whether it's something that I become interested in, something that I become fixated on. And even I'm going away in a couple of weeks. A couple of months. I'm going to go to France for a week with my parents. We don't really spend time away like that these days. My brother and sister are in Australia, so I thought it'd be a nice thing to go and do. But knowing that I'm going to France in 6 to 8 weeks, I'm like, right, how much French can I learn before then? And I'm just like, I was speaking to somebody at work today, and they're just like, chill out, you're learning Spanish, just one thing at a time. And I think that's quite an important thing. There are so many things you can watch Wimbledon and think, oh wow, wouldn't it be amazing to be that good at tennis? And yeah, if you're at a young age, if you put that much time into something like that, I'm a believer that you could get to that point. but that you have to sacrifice so many other things and not realize that you can't pursue so many other things in the process of getting to that end result. Me kind of making the transition into architecture, you realize that okay, I'm gonna go and start at the bottom again. I'm walking away from a stable career. I'm walking away from what I'm used to and what I know, but I'm okay with that because I know that even though I'm not at the end goal now, in another 7 or 8 years when I'm a licensed architect and I can do my own thing, set up my own practice or whatever I end up doing, this journey of getting there and the time that I've put in, I know I'll look back on and think, okay, you've arrived. This is the journey that you set yourself on.
And I couldn't agree more there as well. Like, it's so easy to be like, I want to do all of this at the same time, but it's part of the process and learning to park stuff, which is totally fine. It's not saying, oh, I can't do it and I'll never do it. You can just park it for another time when maybe it might come back into your life. And it's such an important skill because trying to do everything all at the same time at once, it's very hard to make progress in all the things at the same time. Some people do it, some people are crazy, and I love them for it. Like, I think you're crazy in a good way in terms of how much you do. But again, people often tell me I do a lot as well, but I think it's very common to get that imposter syndrome around it and not to see it until people actually tell you about that.
Yeah, yeah. It's this concept of finding balance, isn't it? What is balance? It's for me. It's kind of I've been through times because obviously I'm living on my own in Croydon at the minute, which is quite a way out the city. It was super hard to try and find a flat with Will and Alex when I first moved to London, so I ended up in this flat in South London, which is an amazing place to live in. It. I'm really grateful for the opportunity that I got to move to this place. But I found myself during times when I was doing a lot of studying and kind of focusing on Spanish, studying towards my architecture stuff. I was just kind of on my own in my flat and driving towards all these different things, and then you kind of feel like, it's been 2 weeks. You've made a lot of progress, but you've not met up with any friends. You've not had a beer. Like you've not socialised, and then I feel like okay, I need to go and do that and trade a bit of social energy. And then I do that for too much. 2 weeks go by, and I'm drinking too. I feel like I'm drinking too much. I'm spending too much time with all these people, and then studies sacrificing. I'm sacrificing my studies. I'm sacrificing my Spanish. So I'm constantly in this yo-yo where I'm like, fuck, I need to do this. I need to do that. Whereas you just realise over time that just follow what you feel like you want to do. If you want to do some studying, great. If you want to go and socialise, just I suppose I'm trying to teach myself not to stress about these things and just take life as it comes. You get busy at times, but it's all right. Just enjoy it.
Just enjoy it, exactly. And it's like, it was actually something I was about to ask you about. I was about to kind of segue in terms of like, it's not just balancing your creative passions while working. You've also got your social life, your friends, your family, and you made such a good point there. Something I need to tell myself as well. It's too easy to be like, I'm not socializing enough now. I'm socializing too much. I'm not spending time on my projects. But I think the key thing, as you just said, is just be happy with what you're doing. Just, it's fine to pick one thing. It's fine to go enjoy time with your mates, even if you might not, I don't know, you might not get on the decks for a month. But it's not like, I think if you start to hold yourself to, I must be doing this, I must be doing that, it can kind of start to hamper a bit on the beauty in the process. But at the same time, it's not as easy as that. It's not as easy to deal with life like that. But you got to do your best.
Yeah, it can be so easy to turn things down. I spoke to my brother. So my brother's recently gone over to Sydney for 8 weeks. He's had the opportunity to go over with work and work over there for 8 weeks. And I spoke to him on the phone the week before he went, and he kind of because I had no intention to go back to see him off because I was thinking, £70 for a train to get up there. I've got quite a busy weekend coming up, and I remember speaking to him on the train when I was on the train on the way into the city one day, and I had a conversation with him, and he was like, "Are you going to come and see me off before I go?" And I think in a bit of a jokey way. I remember that really took me back. I was like, "He's going to Australia. Yeah, it's for 8 weeks. It's not permanently, but he's making such a big move to go over and experience something new. I'm 2 hours away now. It's a train journey. Yeah, it's £70 that probably felt like I didn't want to spend, not spend it on my brother, but it's not something that I plan to do. But then I kind of realised being here, especially being in the Middle East for 3 years and being a 7-hour flight away to see family and friends and stuff, that's something that I also really try and prioritise. Going home on these nice occasions, going home for Mother's Day, going home to see my brother off, and just spending quality time with family and friends and the people that I feel like I've not had the opportunity to spend time with for so long.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It kind of puts things in perspective like that. And like another thing I kind of wanted to stem off when we're talking about balance was how do you find pursuing these things you enjoy? Like, how does it affect your well-being and mental health? Like, there'll be times of elation, but you find sometimes times where you hit a bit of a mental block if you're doing quite a lot. And if you do hit a bit of a block, how do you deal with it? Like, what do you do to encourage yourself again?
Uh, I think for me, I think exercise is such an important thing, and I think this is the other thing when I talk about balance. Like for me, I'd love to be in the gym every night or running or doing something where I'm really pushing my limits physically and mentally. But I think I struggle with everything else that I'm doing. My weeks are always kind of so busy, and I can find myself where I don't go to the gym for a week, and then that kind of gets to me, and I stress myself out because I'm not going and training. I know that whenever I go and train, my head is completely clear. But when you're trying to pursue so many things and you neglect what a lot of people would say are the basic fundamental things in life, keeping yourself fit and healthy, I feel like that can kind of stress me out. That can wear me down. But I think generally I am quite a resilient person. I think being in London, yeah, everyone has days where they feel a bit low, a bit down, but I think I'm really fortunate to feel like I've got purpose in my life. I feel like I'm on the right path, and even if I have a day at work that isn't amazing, or I feel a bit lost in day-to-day studying or whatever it may be, I know that my life generally I'm kind of pointing in the right direction. And I've not got everything figured out now. I might not have everything figured out in 10 years, but I know that the path that I'm on now is kind of taking me in the right direction. And I know that at some point in life everything will will click together. And I think the other side of that is I'm so grateful and so blessed to have so many good friends in London. I think traveling for 6 months and meeting so many people like yourself that were either living in London or moving to London, there's this real excitement, this buzz of all these people moving to the city at the same time. And meeting people here can be tough. I mean, you meet enough people, but building strong relationships with people takes time. I think when you're traveling and you're in these places away from home together, and you're in this kind of hostile environment, you connect with people so quickly. I feel like I've known you for years, Brie. In fact, it probably has been a year now, actually. But I feel like I've known you for so much longer than I have. So yeah, I think that's the other side. I know that whenever things feel a bit not as good as other times, I know that I can pick the phone up and go and meet you or whoever's in the city and just kind of get away from the environment when it gets a bit much.
That kind of adds into the balance, and it can like steady the scales when things are feeling a bit too much, and it's something I do as well. Like, I think it's important in life to accept that not every day of your life is going to be the best day of your life. There are ups and downs in life, but as you said, when you said if you're heading in the right direction, it's good. It's kind of like the creative process. It's kind of like learning Spanish. It's learning to DJ. Like step by step, if you're improving it like with your well-being and your mental health and where life's going, it's not going to be always smooth sailing, but I think having an appreciation and understanding that can really help you. And then, as you said, kind of having methods for how you might deal with it. Like if, for example, I find if I'm feeling quite low energy, I mentioned this on the last bit of the podcast, and I'll mention it again. Um, Someone once told me to bring your flag and see, like, even if you're feeling low and someone like reaches out, is like, I want to hang out with you, rather than like overthinking if I really want to do it, just to go and just to bring my flag and just say, if after 10 minutes I don't want to do it, I'll leave. And because who knows, it might be that boost that I really needed.
Yeah, I think that's always the case, isn't it? I feel like you can overthink certain situations. You can especially for me being where I am in South London, it can take an hour and a bit to get into the city sometimes. And sometimes I'm like, oh, do I want to make the effort 2.5 or 2 hour round trip to get there and back? And then I get there, and usually all the time, if you're meeting your friends, it's nice. You catch up with them, you have a beer, you grab some food, you kind of forget about the feelings that you had before you actually left. I think the other thing that I've really learned, and I feel like it's been a really important thing for me to learn about myself, is being comfortable to be on my own. I think before I moved to the Middle East, I was always around family, friends, loved ones, and I was never really on my own. And not that I was uncomfortable alone, but I never really experienced being being alone for prolonged periods of time. I think moving to the Middle East and struggling to settle in for the first year or so and meet people, and then obviously having COVID, I spent so much time on my own, and I kind of became comfortable with something that used to feel uncomfortable. And I think that is something that I'm so grateful for today. I think living on my own, where I'm living in Croydon, although I don't think I've told you yet, but I'm moving further into the city soon, which is exciting. But yeah, anyway, learning how to be comfortable on my own, traveling solo for 6 months, you kind of realise that A, I'm comfortable to be alone, but B, when you are on your own, it opens the opportunity up. It opens up the opportunity to meet so many people so much more easily than you would if you were with other people. Even being in Madrid this weekend, being in the hostel on your own, you just I found this confidence that I didn't used to have to just walk up to people and start a conversation. Because if you don't do that, you're on your own. So it's a really important skill set, I think, for people to try and get their head around. It's not easy though. I think it takes some time. And I've experienced loneliness before, and loneliness isn't a nice feeling. But yeah, there's a huge difference between being alone and being lonely.
Massively. It's so true. Like I found, like yourself, I had a period when I was in Bristol of living alone. I lived alone during the pandemic. And although, like, at the start that can be quite daunting to not see people, as I found it did present opportunity, like being comfortable alone, finding like a rhythm to that, but also it has allowed me in the past to actually do other stuff. Like, rather than just sitting there staring at the ceiling, thinking, what am I doing? What am I doing? Or overthinking it. Sometimes I'm like, right, I'm going to use this time and I'm going to, I don't know, start watching some YouTube videos about geopolitics or something. Or it could be anything. Or, this podcast honestly came out of me when I went, after travels, went from the summer of Argentina to the winter of Coventry, which was a rather humbling experience. But if it wasn't for that, in a period where I was feeling pretty low, that this podcast wouldn't have came out of it. Like, that's what pushed me to actually start creating. I tried so many things when I came back. I tried making this podcast. I tried writing like a script for like a YouTube video series I was thinking of working on, learning
cool.
to DJ, learning to use Ableton to produce music. And that's why I'm thankful. If it wasn't for that moment of what I perceived as lonely as low, we wouldn't be here making an episode right now.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing to and I think that's where for me, when I live on my own, I travel into work on my own, but I don't really use that as thinking time. Usually, I work 9 till 6 every day during the week, and I get home at 7 p.m. And if I'm not going to the gym after work, then I'll be cooking my dinner with a podcast on or watching YouTube or whatever I'm doing. And I'm or FaceTiming family, friends. So I feel like my mind's always active. I'm always doing things. But I feel like when I was traveling, one of my favourite things when I was traveling was to actually be traveling, to be sat on a bus for, sounds a bit crazy to some people, but sat on a bus for 18 hours, staring out the window and just really having time to stop, switch off, and just think, just think about things, think about where you are in life, having times to actually feel grateful for the things, the experiences that you've had, the people that you've met, the things that you've got going on for you in your life now, and then even thinking about the future, having time to stop and take some deep breaths and just think, okay, this is where I am. It's it's quite an important thing.
I couldn't agree with you more, because I'm the same type of crazy as you, where I actually love those 18-hour bus journeys, because I think we're very similar in terms that we're like serial doers doing a lot, but being in those scenarios where you're no longer doing, you just stare out the window, let your mind subconsciously wander and kind of like think about these things naturally and have an appreciation for where you're in the moment. It's such an important thing to do. So I actually love those bus rides. I did too.
For sure. It's I've experienced both sides. I remember when obviously last week, as I mentioned, I was in Spain, in Valencia with a friend and his family, and obviously that was a real wholesome time. And then going to Madrid, the first night in Madrid, we talk about these hostels all the time, Pre. It was one of those hostels where it looks amazing online, and to be fair, it was a really good hostel. There was a rooftop bar that was open to the public, and it was one of those where there was no social space, and you're just like, especially travelling solo, you want a long table in a common area that you can go and sit at with people in the hostel and just get to know people really quickly, really easily. And the first night I was in Madrid, I walked up to the rooftop bar on my own, thinking I'd meet people up there. Walked out and I realised that it was just full of people from the public, like not staying in the hostel. I'm like, fuck, I don't know who's staying here. Normally I'd go over and just say, hi, like, do you mind if I join, and just start speaking to people? But when you see people and you think, are they on a date? They look like they're celebrating someone's birthday. They look like they're local. Like, you don't really know who you can approach. So I decided to just go out and kind of explore on my own, add some food. And I remember that night I kind of thought, this is a little bit naff. I kind of wanted to meet some people, and probably got in my own head a little bit. But then the next day I kind of went to explore, went to see the Bernabeu and all the typical tourist things you can do, which I don't mind exploring a city on my own. But then that night, I kind of went to the social activity at night, met a lot of people, went out with them, and it was such a good night. And then the next day, I got up and went to a beautiful little place called Toledo on my own, and I really appreciate those moments when I'm on my own, because I could have gone with other people. There were other people that I knew from the night before that I knew would go in, but with my interest in architecture and kind of, I just wanted to go and see this place on my own and just really appreciate the place that it was. It's like a medieval city that's got so much history. And the difference between walking around the city of Madrid alone, but wanting to meet people, and the kind of headspace I was in then, compared to being in Toledo on my own, but knowing that was a decision that I made to go on my own, it was a completely different experience. I was full of excitement. Like I kind of really enjoyed just going around, looking at the city, speaking to a few of the locals. It was amazing, but such a different experience to two experiences that from the outside looking in, you're just a person walking around city or Madrid or Toledo on your own. But the kind of headspace that you're in during that process is completely different.
I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree with you more there, mate. And it is interesting like that. Sometimes, you might be craving those social interactions and wanting something to happen and like feeling up for it. But then the next day, you might not have had that social interaction the day before, but you're kind of ready. You're actually ready to be on your own and appreciate something by yourself, which is a really fucking cool thing.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
but yeah, I thought that was quite a nice segue into kind of wrapping up now. So thanks for being on, Toby. It's good catching up. I'll probably catch up with you outside soon. But yeah, thanks for coming on. If is there anything more you want to say? Do you have anything to plug, or are we good?
No, I think just thank you, Preet. It's something we spoke about for a while, and I think it's good to be a part of the beginning of this process for you. I think you're a natural at doing this, so I'm excited to listen to the upcoming episodes and just see where you take
Oh,
this.
thank you. I'm hoping I don't go through the edit and hate the sound of my voice or something. But now there's like a big reason I chose you was not only because you do a lot outside of work, just also I knew that there was a comfortability to it with you because we are good mates, of course.
No, you've got a voice for it. I remember. Yeah, I remember the first time you mentioned this. So yeah, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be on it. It's a little bit weird to be talking on a podcast because I listen to so many podcasts, but yeah, I've enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's interesting being interviewed by your mate, but here we are. But no, thanks for coming on, Toby, and take care.
No worries. Cheers, Preet.